So today we will be covering all these topics. Basically, the main top focus is on mens rea, but how mens rea is applied or appreciated in practical trials, and then why this concept exists in criminal law. What is mens rea? We can all read in books. It is very common and basic phrase and term available in all the criminal law books. Since we are to decode this concept, and by and large, the elements of crime will have to be understood. With the help of an example, I will show you how it is applied in the trials. And at last, we will do some perspective analysis. Now, perspective analysis is something which what I think as a legal professional about the concept of mens rea and its connection with the criminal trial. So let's begin by first generally understanding what is mens rea. This term is actually part of a legal maxim: actus non facit rum nisi mens sit rea. Let us make this tongue twister little simple and rephrase it into English from the Latin. So, in simple English, it means an act does not make a defendant guilty without a guilty mind. We all know that a person is only an accused until proven guilty, and then he becomes a convict. The entire trial, if you give a comprehensive thought, is a journey towards finding this guilty mind. Trial is not merely about punishing a person. Punishing a person is very easy. Trial is about reaching a conclusion beyond reasonable doubt that the accused was indeed guilty and he indeed had a guilty mind. Now, where do we find this mens rea defined? Is it defined in IPC anywhere? It may not be defined in clear terms, but you can formulate it from various sections in the chapter of general exceptions in the Indian Penal Code. So, section 81 is one of such sections. I will read it. Nothing is an offense merely by reason of its being done with the knowledge that it is likely to cause harm, if it be done without a criminal intention to cause harm, and in good faith for purpose of preventing or avoiding other harm to person or property. Now, pertinently, though the section is part of general exceptions, if you observe this section, it starts with words, nothing is an offense. Thereby, it makes it clear that offense would not be an offense unless there is a criminal intention. So, though this chapter is of general exception, but the usage of negative sentence is such that it makes criminal intention mandatory, the existence of criminal intention mandatory. And we will see later that only in exceptional circumstances will an offense be regarded as an offense in absence of criminal intention or the guilty mind or the mens rea. Then there is an explanation to this also. Now, this explanation basically points out at the question of fact, and in a way, it postulates the necessity of having trial. Now, let's move to why is mens rea necessary? The answer to this can be inferred by imagining what if mens rea does not exist or it is not mandatory. In other words, what if one does not have to prove the existence of guilty mind? Then police can easily just shoot any person at sight. मर्डर की इंफॉर्मेशन मिल गई, अक्यूज का नाम भी मिल गया, चलो पकड़ो उसको और ठोक डाल. Encounters will replace trials. Something like what happened in the unfortunate incident, Hyderabad rape incident. The people have celebrated death of some 4 men, assuming them to be rapists and hoping that the real culprits are not out free. Then imagine a situation where you are, say, driving a car in a very narrow lane and your brakes fail. And it so happens that on one side of that lane is one old man and the other side a young person. You will have to make a choice. You will have to make a choice to kill someone. Well, this question is based on the principle necessity knows no law, which again is meaning of a tongue twisting Latin maxim, which you can read yourself on the screen. Furthermore, if no one is required to be concerned of this guilty mind and how to discover this guilty mind, then it will lead to dictatorship. A powerful person will simply start killing people, all those people whom he doesn't like, he will simply kill. Therefore, this principle is so important that it actually keeps the society civil and away from jungle Raj. Anyways, we will not spend much time on the theory and we will move ahead uh, on decoding this mens rea. Since we are by now aware about the concept of mens rea, we need to also understand what possibly could mean decoding mens rea. In every criminal proceeding, right from the point of time when criminal law is set in motion, to investigation, to framing of a charge, to leading evidences, and to ultimately reaching a conclusion after the whole trial is over. There is a constant involvement of human decision making. Now, here, by decision making, I am not restricting it to courts, but rather extending it to decision makers like the investigating agencies, say the police or the CBI or the EOW, because investigating agencies have to constantly decide what evidence is to be collected, how it is to be collected. Decision making is important for the prosecution as well as the defense lawyers. The lawyers, both the prosecution and the defense, will have to decide which strategy to adopt. All these are human decision makers. I always recollect the words of philosopher George Shashwood, who said that where passion is allowed to prevail, your judgment is dethroned. What I am trying to point at is that these decision making processes are often exposed to many prejudices, personal preferences. For example, if there is an incident of theft, the first person that comes to mind of most human beings as the suspect is the servant in the house. This is because the common thought process of discovering the guilty mind is very stereotyped. On same lines, in countries like America, it is said that there is a prejudice towards black people. They say that black people commit crime, and possibly that is how the movement of Black Lives Matter came into picture. Our country is no different. Not long back, the Supreme Court, while hearing a review petition, acquitted 6 persons who were convicted of gang rape, dacoity, and murder. It was reported in the news that those people also belong to a particular nomadic tribe. They were possibly falsely trapped in by the police, and real culprits again might have gone free. For us right now, academically, it is immaterial whether the parties in those proceedings were actually guilty or not. But what is relevant is why such a situation occurred where the apex court had to overturn the findings when the case was judged by a trial court after conducting a full-fledged trial, and also overturn finding of the high court where possibly the entire evidence was read into. Why did this lacuna remain? Of course, in that particular judgment, the court heavily came on the investigation. Yet, why this lacuna? It is because of the prejudices in decision making, because of the common thought process of discovering guilty mind in a stereotype manner. It is in order to break this prejudice and in order to ensure, as lawyers or judges or any component of criminal justice system for that matter, because it allows you to dissect the sequence of events and comprehend them thoroughly. This in turn can make this and enable you to ensure a better and full-fledged trial and investigation. If investigation is poor, say if investigation is not done properly, a better trial where any material evidence does not go unnoticed can be ensured. And such evidence is then tested from all the perspectives, not to figure out ultimately whether a person has a guilty mind or a mens rea. Knowing elements of a crime is very important. So these are the elements of crime: motive, intention, knowledge, preparation, attempt, commission. I believe it will be easier to understand this concept from most of the Bollywood movies, because most of the Bollywood movies has some or the other storyline where the hero has some vengeance against the villain. And I just thought that I will also take inspiration and from a Bollywood movie to quote the example. Those who have seen this movie may try to relate to the stages of commission of crime. The intention or motive of this character played by Shah Rukh Khan to be in the power in a powerful chair and to grab that chair as a revenge. Then to accomplish his motive, you can see what he is doing. He is preparing to woo the daughter of opponent, make her fall in love so much that she readily comes with him for dates and roams around with him. And ultimately, he takes her to the terrace, and after she has completely fallen for him in love and she has developed a kind of trust which he knows which he knows that the trust exists, and that's how he uses that trust to take her to a particular place and prepares towards commission of a crime, and then the push and the actual commission. Now, if we try to dig deep and try to distinguish between this motive and intention, we can do so. A motive behind commission of a crime may be immaterial and may be of no consequence, meaning existence or absence of motive may not be material, but existence of intention is material. For instance, let us imagine that Shah Rukh Khan in that movie was motivated to grab chair. That is fine, but merely that motivation is not material. In as much as it is very much possible that while Shah Rukh Khan still had this motivation of taking revenge and grabbing that chair, parallelly someone else also could have had the motivation and actually, let us for example assume someone else killed Shilpa Shetty. It is possible, say some other character in the movie, for instance the character of Kajol, who played her sister, had killed Shilpa Shetty out of jealousy. It is also a possibility, isn't it? So in such a scenario, though Shah Rukh Khan had the motive of taking revenge, but the elements of attempt and commission were absent because Shilpa Shetty was killed by someone else. So motive would become irrelevant then because the crime is committed by someone else. Now let us test it the original way. That is the way how it looks in the clips. If Shah Rukh Khan had killed Shilpa Shetty actually, in such scenario also motive is immaterial. Why? Because the fact remains that he killed her. Attempt is there, commission is there. So motive remains immaterial. But his intention was, and this is because his intention was to throw her from the terrace. And he had the actual knowledge that she will die if she falls from that height. So in both these scenarios, the motive remained irrelevant. But let us test something further. Is motive altogether irrelevant? In totality, is it irrelevant? Not really. Then when is motive relevant? Motive becomes relevant when the chain of sequence towards finding the guilty mind needs to be completed, where there is no direct evidence on the attempt and the commission. That is when the motive will become relevant. Here you can see that you can see directly there is an attempt and commission. But there may be a situation where there is no eyewitness, hence there is no direct evidence. I will explain this to you with help of an example. Now, this dissection of the elements is what is important in trial while we appreciate the existence of guilty mind or the mens rea. this is how the concept is relevant. It is a case of son killing his own mother. Let us read a portion of that evidence where statement of witness is recorded. Now, since there was no eyewitness to this case, circumstantial evidence became important. Hence, since intention cannot be seen directly, to find out the existence of guilty mind, that is mens rea, reliance on the motive comes into picture. And as we read the evidence, you will realize the prosecution straight away has opened the evidence of this witness by creating a base of motive first and then bringing the incident on record. Now, there is some underlying portion. If you can see, the accused was addicted to liquor and was not doing any work. He used to borrow money from his wife and mother for drinking liquor. On refusal to give money, he used to beat them. This is the motive which the prosecution, through this particular witness, has brought on record. Usually, the prosecution witness will start by narrating the incident first. But here, if see, this is the incident. Usually, this incident narration of such an incident comes first. But here, what the prosecution has done, prosecution has started the bringing the motive on record first. Why is it so? Because they also know that there is no direct evidence, no eyewitness. Therefore, to connect the accused to the crime, to establish his guilty mind, establishing his motive will be more important. You have to notice that there was no eyewitness in the case. The prosecution knew that it was a challenge. Therefore, element of motive takes some relevance here. This is to complete the chain. Now let us see how the judge in this case has dealt with this particular part while deciding. He convicted the accused, but on what basis he arrived at that conclusion? If you see, he has recorded after going through the entire evidence, it appears from the circumstance which are being relied upon by the prosecution. And the second point, motive, refusal of money for drinking. Furthermore, even while considering the evidence brought by the prosecution on record, if you read somewhere in the middle, in view of the evidence that has been brought on record by the prosecution with regard to the accused being unkind to his mother, beating her frequently on account of demand of money so as to buy and consume liquor, the statements of so and so named above would fully establish that accused was addicted to liquor and used to give beatings to his mother. So this is how, in this particular case, the motive becomes relevant. To further decode this concept, gist of the facts need to be appreciated in this judgment. This is a Supreme Court judgment, and how elements of crime are then discussed would be interesting. This judgment of Supreme Court explains stages of crime in a very crisp manner, where the question was on the offense of rape and whether the accused has committed rape or not. In that case, the factual matrix was that accused had taken the prosecutrix forcibly to a cattle shed and ejaculated before actual intercourse. Then, on hearing some sound, the accused went away from there. So the Supreme Court held that since there was no penetration, it won't amount to rape. It will only amount to an attempt, and hence the conviction was altered to attempt to rape. It is in this context that the stages are explained. And now, if you read the portion of this judgment, it will bring more clarity about the importance of elements of crime. Okay? So they have explained what is attempt, what is to commit an offense, and what is it like to prepare for an offense, what is motive, all that is covered. And it has also decoded the attempt and commission aspect. So coming back to our mental elements of crime, and knowledge and preparation is also one of it. So I suppose it was Lord Delvin who had stated that there are 3 degrees of knowledge. So the first is the actual knowledge. Then the second kind of knowledge is willful blindness, where a person purposely turns a blind eye on surrounding circumstances. So when we say two accused in connivance committed a crime, that connivance could be a result of willful blindness. An example would be if a watchman in your building allows thieves to enter your building in midnight by acting as if he has not noticed them entering and acts as if he did not know anything about it. This is willful blindness. Then there is something called as constructive knowledge, which means that a person is expected to know a particular thing. For instance, you must have come across many cases of medical negligence, like when a mop was left inside the body of the patient. A doctor is not expected to let the mop inside a patient, or a doctor is expected to know which limb to operate upon. If he cuts a wrong limb, he is certainly guilty. There again, his intention may not be to kill a person, but by operating on wrong limb, he has shown negligence. So constructive knowledge would essentially mean that by reason of having an MBBS degree, that doctor is expected to have the knowledge of medical science. Now, is there another reason why we have to understand certain elements independently and its existence or absence independently? How does it help a lawyer? Well, Halsbury law says that although the view has been expressed that it is impossible to ascribe any particular meaning to the term mens rea, concepts such as those of intention and knowledge are commonly used as the basis of criminal liability, and in some respects may be said to be fundamental to the concept of mens rea. Well, now is the time where we begin to understand this need of analyzing these perspectives. What will happen is, if you are able to convince a court that actions of accused were only limited to the attempt and not commission, it helps to sometimes reduce the punishment, because then you will be able to convince the judge and get a conviction for a lesser offense. It helps in aiding the court to understand that the accused can be punished for a lesser offense. Like in this case, which we discussed earlier, from the offense of rape, the offense was reduced to attempt to rape. So guilty mind could be reflected in all these elements of crime, but it is essential to understand to what extent that guilty mind has traveled. For further reading of this concept, I will suggest reading this case, Nathulal versus State of Madhya Pradesh. It is a judgment of full bench. This judgment has emphasized that mens rea is a prerequisite for an offense. But let us move further and question ourselves, does mens rea need to exist always? Now, this is where I had mentioned earlier, there are certain exceptions. So in cases of public welfare enactments, existence of mens rea is not necessary. So in one of the cases which I was handling, it was under the Factories Act, where this point of mens rea was argued by relying on Nathulal versus State of MP, which deals primarily with mens rea. So the judgment was cited in the trial court with respect to Factories Act to suggest that the director who was accused had no intention to commit the offense. And the accused was convicted, holding that existence or non-existence of mens rea in such statutes is not material. Now, exactly this is the question which was answered in JK Industries Limited case, whether mens rea is applicable in welfare legislations or not, and in particular Factories Act. From what we comprehend from these laws and judgments is that they essentially suggest whether mens rea is applicable or not would depend on how the statute is worded. You can have a read at this particular paragraph of the judgment. Now we move further, and the next question in decoding our process of decoding mens rea is, can corporation have mens rea? So these are the words of Lord Denning. A company may in many ways be likened to a human body. They have a brain and a nerve center, which controls what they do. They also have hands which hold tools and act in accordance with directions from the center. Some of the people in company are mere servants and agents who are nothing more than hands to do the work and cannot be said to represent the mind or will. Other are directors and managers who represent the directing mind and will of the company and control what they do. The state of mind of these managers is the state of mind of the company and is treated by law as such. Then there was this judgment where the question was whether the company, this is an Indian judgment, the question was whether a corporation can have mens rea or not. And this is Bombay High Court judgment, which was overruled. But nonetheless, we have to just read what was their interpretation about mens rea and its applicability to the corporation. So according to them, mens rea can be applicable only to natural person and not to a corporation. Now the Supreme Court, when the same case went to the Supreme Court, it observed that from the above it becomes evident that a corporation is virtually in the same position as any individual and may be convicted of common law as well as statutory offenses, including those requiring mens rea. The criminal liability of a corporation would arise when an offense is committed in relation to the business of the corporation by a person or body of persons in control of its affairs. In such circumstances, it would be necessary to ascertain that degree and control of the person or body of persons is so intense that a corporation may be said to think and act through the person or the body of persons. The position of law in this issue in Canada is also the same. So other countries also. So this observation seems to be on similar lines of what Lord Denning has observed. So the words of Lord Denning and this particular judgment are pertinent for the purposes of understanding the attributes and nature of a corporation as conceived by the Supreme Court, and how it is distinguished from the observations of Bombay High Court. The factor of mens rea is determinant factor for a crime, whether a corporation by virtue of being a juristic person can have mens rea, in turn who will be liable for the acts of the juristic person if it cannot have mens rea. So the judgment of the apex court in Iridium Incorporation is a settled law now. From the judgment and the articulate observation of Lord Denning, the degree of control of the person or body of persons is enough for a corporation to think as well as act. So corporation can think and it can act also. Hence, corporation can have a guilty mind also. Now, I hope you have realized how different cases have been dealt with differently with respect to the principles of mens rea. Since we are on the criminal law, last but not the least, it is important to understand the system that administers criminal law. This system consists of 4 pillars or 4 organs: the police, the prosecution, the judge, the defense. It is important that you understand the roles of these 4 pillars, because the criminal justice is like a tent which stands on these 4 pillars. Any weakness or vulnerability in a single pillar may bring the element of injustice. And when you study a particular case or prepare for a particular case, it is essential that you understand the roles played by these pillars without prejudices. But in fact, when you study and understand roles of these pillars without prejudices, it should include you also. So you should study the part played by all four pillars without prejudice, irrespective of what you as a pillar think about it. This will give you a fair knowledge and know-how of the case from different perspectives. This in turn would allow you to fit your strategies properly to place the case before the court properly. So if you are on prosecution and you know there is a lacuna in your case, you would be able to fill that lacuna only if you comprehend what the other pillars are thinking and what the other pillars are looking at. Like what we saw in the example of trial of the accused who allegedly killed her mother, where the prosecution knew that lacuna lied in the direct evidence. They did not have an eyewitness, and therefore they formulated their case on motive, and then they connected it to the crime. Same is with a defense lawyer. In order to draw a particular defense, it is essential to comprehend what the prosecution case is, what the judge will be looking at. Who is the judge for that matter? What has the police got for the prosecution? Is there any imbalance? So also, what as a defense lawyer can you drive towards while presenting your case? A judge also needs to foresee all possible situations, what police has done, what prosecution is hitting at, and what ways does defense has to create doubt in prosecution case. This is very important because if this is properly executed, then situations like what we saw, that the Supreme Court had to release those 6 accused, such situation will not arise. A police functionary also, for that matter, while investigating, should actually be investigating from the perspective of a judge, a prosecution, a defense lawyer, so that they do the investigation in a proper manner. Unfortunately, we see them scripting stories than doing investigation, and then we see, as I said, acquittals at the stage of review petition by the Supreme Court. Also say from my experience, it is far more easier said than done for any of these pillars, but this is the way how one should try to do and aim at, and this is what at least I try to do in whichever case I handle. It is important to understand mens rea not just as its literal meaning, that is the guilty mind, but how its existence or its absence can be shown by a study of different elements of crime. So these are very fundamental things, and a lot of theories have been written by philosophers and jurists on this. And it is obvious because of these theories that are roots from where the entire trial is set towards a conviction or an acquittal. For any of the pillars of the courts, especially the lawyers, it is important that they analyze the case in these stages in order to get acquittal. What basically a basically a prosecution has to do what basically the defense has to do to break the link in the stages, and similarly what prosecution should do in order to build a strong case. Defense's strategy is to create doubt of its commission of an offense and doubt in existence of mens rea. They would be able to do it only if they are able to dissect all these elements properly. Now, this is what is a perspective analysis when it comes to mens rea and decoding it. It is in this backdrop that one has to decode mens rea.
Hello. Yes, sir. A small question like what are the provisions available under human rights if anybody becomes a victim for police atrocities?
Under human rights?
Yeah,
How is it?
for police atrocities like The same you said, the police is also like a corporate body or a corporation, wherein by the police force can think and operate, and they prepare stories and falsely implicate a innocent person. So under that circumstances, if the falsely implication on the part of the police can be termed as atrocities of police, and the innocent person may be compensated for that under human rights.
Yes, not only under human rights, but in fact, in the example which I had given you, where the Supreme Court uh, acquitted all those 6 people, I must also inform you that compensation of 5 lakh each was also ordered by the Supreme Court. Secondly, even the investigating officers, those investigating officers, an action against them also was directed by the Supreme Court. So it does happen that in a situation where such kind of circumstance happens and the people are unnecessarily trapped into and dragged into a particular case, and later on it is discovered that this was a false case, action is taken against police also.
Sir, I have one question. My question is, what is the role of mens rea in hit and run cases?
Okay. In hit and run cases, so you have to analyze using the same logic which I had explained, the stages of crime. A hit and run, as in while you are driving and you have hit somebody and then you have fled away, correct?
Yes.
So what will be the motive, the ingredient of motive? If suppose there is no eyewitness, first we will have to examine whether there is eyewitness. If there was a CCTV camera, okay, and then that particular CCTV camera captures the incident, there will be 2 aspects. One, if the person has run away, that means he is trying to flee from that particular place. So there is a motive of running away from and knowing that he has committed some kind of wrong, or he was overspeeding. That is the reason why he ran away from there. On the contrary, if the person actually uh, takes that patient, the victim, to hospital, then the motive will be different. So the stages of crime will have to be accordingly tested based on the facts in hit and run case also. Similarly, in hit and run case, the example of doctor which I gave you, that also would apply on the lines of negligence, that is constructive knowledge. So if you had a constructive knowledge that you should not overspeed on a particular road, and still if you were overspeeding, that means you were negligent. So there was a guilty mind. There was a angle of guilty mind there. So all these things will be based on the facts, how to fit into it. And that is how, as I have mentioned, that if the evidence has to be collected by an investigating officer, this is what he will have to follow. If from all angles he will have to foolproof the evidence.
If in some case motive is
Hmm.
bigger than intention, then to whom we will give preference?
If motive is bigger than intention. Okay, you have any particular case, like an example in your mind, or you are
Sir,
simply asking what is? Tell me.
Yeah, sir. Simply asking.
Okay, so when there is no direct evidence, that it is only on that occasion you have to go into motive. But if there is direct evidence, like an eyewitness is there, then the intention of the particular person will be very apparent from the deposition of that eyewitness. It is only when the eyewitness is not there, you have to fall on the aspect of motive. And then the motive could be anything, like a revenge could be an motive, or how we saw in that example, drinking, that also could be a motive. Greed can be a motive. But another important aspect, since you asked about this intention and motive, why motive is also immaterial most of the times, is because otherwise what will happen, noble motive is something like, because I am hungry and I am a very poor person, I need to feed my family, therefore I committed theft. So the motive may be very noble, but still that doesn't mean that there is no intention to commit crime. Hence, motive in those aspects also becomes irrelevant. So the weightage of motive comes into picture only if there is no direct evidence. Otherwise, intention is the element which has to be given preference.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Sir, there is
And
another.
there is one, sorry, go ahead.
Sir, there is another query. Sir, if we will go through this, motive is only the element which can complete the crime if there is no intention.
Motive is the only
Element
no.
which
See,
can complete
motive,
the crime.
no, it cannot complete the crime. As I said, it is only used to complete the chain of events. So, for instance, if you have found a weapon, okay, on the particular scene of crime, and the fingerprints are also there matching with the accused, but there is no direct evidence that no one has seen that particular person committing a murder, but there are fingerprints on the particular weapon. In this case, motive comes at aid, because simpliciter, because on the basis of fingerprints a person cannot be convicted, because fingerprints can be there by any reason. That weapon might have been picked by the particular person. Suppose I have stabbed in XYZ person's stomach, okay, and I have kept that knife like that and run away. Now some relative of that XYZ person comes, for instance you come for the rescue of that particular victim, and then removes that particular knife from the stomach. Your fingerprints would be on that knife, correct? So does it mean that based on those fingerprints you will face conviction? No. In such scenario, the motive will be relevant, because you did not have motive. At the same time, not test it from another angle. If that knife, I stabbed the person, XYZ person, by knife, and I myself removed by the knife, and I fled away with that knife and threw it somewhere. On that particular knife, now my fingerprints are there. But again, the question will be the same, whether based on those fingerprints, will I be convicted? Is there any another connecting evidence? In such cases, motive would be of relevance. Then the investigation will be done from that angle, and the prosecution will have to test that is there any motive, that was Rishikesh Chavan having some kind of problems with this XYZ person. So that is how motive becomes relevant in certain scenarios.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
On part of defense to only raise a doubt in mind of the judge to indicate that accused is innocent, and yes, it is enough. It is enough for the part. Even a smallest element of doubt is enough, and it is the prosecution's duty to plug this doubt by completing this chain of events. Second is, what is the procedure to obtain copy of police inquest from the police station? Well, all these copies of inquest, etc., if you are party to that particular proceedings, then they are available in the court itself, because a charge sheet is filed in court, and these inquest, etc., are they are part of charge sheet. So if you are accused, the police, it is duty of the magistrate to give you copy of the charge sheet. So those will be part of the charge sheet. Although this has nothing to do with mens rea, but still. So all in all, what is important is to understand all these stages of crime, and then determine how you can play around this concept of mens rea, and create, as a defense, you have to create doubt in the mind of the judge.
So I have a question regarding, like you said, mens rea, the corporation can be tried for mens rea. So, is the corporation which is penalized for the crime, or is it the person who is in charge? And also, sir, I have a
Yes.
second question. What
Uh-huh.
happens if mens rea is not in existence? Is there any special, I mean, any examples for the same? What if the
Yes,
mens
yes,
rea is not existent,
yes. Yes,
exist,
there
or
are examples.
yes,
So
sir.
I will answer your first question. So there is a distinction between this. Of course, a corporation is an artificial entity. So the punishment, when we talk about punishment, it certainly cannot be imprisonment, because an artificial person cannot be imprisoned. But when the offenses, when the punishment to particular offenses, that fine component is there, so fine can be levied on the corporation. And then there is, in certain cases, there is concept of vicarious liability. So the directors of that corporation become vicariously liable for the acts of that corporation. In this context, I do not have the exact citation, but there is a judgment of Standard Chartered Bank. Okay, so that in that particular judgment, this point of punishment is discussed. But to answer your question, corporation obviously cannot be imprisoned, but the directors will be liable. Yeah, now you can ask me the second question, which
Yes, sir.
was,
Thank you so much, sir. So the second question is, what happens if the mens rea is not in existent, but however can be tried for the same? So any examples?
yes. So the example for that is, I had already given it actually. Factories Act is one such enactment, because it is a public welfare law. So there are certain statutory compliances under Factories Act, and there are many enactments, especially in labor legislation. There are many enactments which have to be complied uh, under a particular statute. There are compliances. In such scenarios, mens rea will not be considered, and therefore I had discussed this judgment of JK Industries. Okay, so JK Industries judgment is on with respect to Factories Act, but same judgment can be applied to other enactments where which are welfare legislation, public welfare legislation. So in cases of Factories Act is one example to answer your question, where mens rea is not considered.
Sir, what if mens rea is wrongly understood, or if a person or if an act is mistaken for a mens rea?
Yeah, so mistaken as in mistaken by whom?
By the
police,
prosecution. Yeah.
by the prosecution. So that is where the defense has to show the contradictions in the prosecution's case. So that is the job of the defense lawyer, to create doubt that whether the intention was there to commit crime or not. That is that is what the defense lawyer has to do. So if the prosecution is not able to bring out mens rea on record, it is a good thing for defense lawyer. It becomes his job becomes easier. In particular, if you have any example in mind, then please go ahead and ask. But in general, if prosecution is not able to bring forward mens rea on record, then it is an easier job for the defense to get acquittal. And prosecution usually would not do that. They will ensure that there is enough material to connect the accused to the particular crime. As in the example of the son committing murder of mother, I had explained that there was no direct evidence, but the prosecution smartly brought the motive on record and based their entire case on motive.
Thank you.
In current scenario that we are seeing, that people are using freedom of expression and abusing it. So in that case, as a prosecution, if we have to prosecute somebody or bring attention that this person has abused his, the privilege and is actually doing something which is harmful, so how to bring out the mens rea in that case? Because people can just hide behind freedom of expression. So how to build a mens rea in this case, basically?
Yeah. Yes, I must say a very good question. Now, what happens? Usually, this freedom of expression cover is taken, but most of the times, under Article 19, there are certain reasonable restrictions, which often people forget to refer to. Now, one has to test if the speech given by that particular person are of such nature that they hurt sentiments of a particular sect, they hurt sentiments of nation, or they are of such a nature that they may create a possibility of violence. All these aspects will have to be examined on that particular fact. And then that is how the intention one will be able to understand from the speech. Whether the speech given was only a critical speech in order to, many times it happens that against the government, many people speak. And such speech are then kind of exposed to beyond sometimes beyond freedom of speech, considered to be beyond freedom of speech. In such scenario, the mens rea comes into picture. That was the speaker intending to create any kind of violence, or was intending to defame India as a nation, or was the criticism limited to just ensure that things develop, or it is for betterment of a particular country. So those reasonable restrictions under Article 19 are often forgotten. So those will aid a particular prosecution or a defense lawyer to accordingly dissect.
Okay, thank you, sir. And just one more query that in this same regard that I'm asking. We have now we will see that yes, we have established a mens rea in this case. That person has with an intent has done it, but we may not prove that he has the motivation to do it, but we can prove the intent. Can we successfully prosecute in that case?
Yes, as I have told, that motive is doesn't become material if you can show there was an intent. So if his intent was itself to create some kind of disharmony, and the speech was so direct that there was disharmony, then obviously no need of proving motive.
So in that case, the intent becomes takes the primacy over the motivation, basically.
Absolutely. See, as
Okay.
I have made it clear earlier also, motive becomes relevant only when there is no direct evidence.
Okay.
Hmm.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for
Yeah.
the clarification.
Does every offense in criminal law needs to show mens rea as well as actus reus? Yes. Only exception, as I have already mentioned, is public welfare statutes where mens rea is not relevant. No, thank you very much.